American Sphinx, The Character of Thomas Jefferson by Joseph J. Ellis. Picture this. A man pens the most revolutionary words about human freedom the world has ever seen, while personally enslaving other human beings. A man who constantly preaches the virtues of simple, rustic living, while sipping the finest French wines in his spectacular mansion, drowning in debt. A man who champions a tiny, barely there government, yet as president, makes one of the boldest power moves in history, doubling the nation's size with a single signature. Meet Thomas Jefferson. Sound contradictory? Well, buckle up, because you're about to understand why historian Joseph J. Ellis titled his book American Sphinx. Remember the mythical Sphinx with its impossible riddles? That's Jefferson, a 200-year-old puzzle sitting right at America's core. His face lives on our coins. His words echo in our hearts. When we talk about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, we're speaking his language. He's basically the architect of the American dream. But here's the real question. Who was he, actually? That's what Joseph J. Ellis digs into. This isn't some dusty timeline of dates and battles. It's an investigation into character, a deep dive into someone who was, as Ellis describes, a master of self-deception, a man who could juggle wildly contradictory ideas in his head and somehow function. This National Book Award winner isn't just history, it's a mirror. The contradictions that define Jefferson, the soaring ideals crashing into messy, disappointing realities, are the exact same contradictions defining America itself. By the end of our journey, you won't just know the facts. You'll understand the enigmatic heart of a man who was both visionary prophet and deeply flawed human. You'll see how his personal struggles shaped his politics, and how his greatest strengths were tangled up with his deepest weaknesses. You'll face the American Sphinx and start unraveling the riddle he still poses today. To crack the mystery of Thomas Jefferson, we can't start at his birth. We need to start with the legend. Joseph Ellis opens by describing what he calls the Jeffersonian surge, this magnetic pull Jefferson has on the American imagination. People from every walk of life feel connected to him. They see him as the living embodiment of America's highest ideals. But this beloved icon is also deeply mysterious. As Ellis puts it, studying Jefferson is like entering a crowded room where the conversations never stop and the stakes always run deeper than just historical facts. He's the great Sphinx of American history. So instead of a chronological slog, Ellis gives us intense, cinematic snapshots of Jefferson at critical moments, hoping to glimpse the real man behind the marble monument. First stop, Philadelphia, 1775. Picture a tall, lean man in his early 30s, reddish blonde hair, quiet and almost shy. He doesn't arrive with thundering speeches, but in an elegant 4-horse carriage, 3 enslaved servants in tow. This is Thomas Jefferson, Virginia's youngest delegate to the Continental Congress. In a room packed with powerful speakers like John Adams and Patrick Henry, Jefferson's practically invisible. Adams later said he never heard Jefferson speak more than 3 sentences at once. Terrible public speaker, awkward, reserved. But hand him a pen, game over. His reputation came from a pamphlet called A Summary View of the Rights of British America, a blistering attack on British authority that revealed something deeper about Jefferson's mind. He didn't just argue legal points. He told a story, a grand romantic myth about ancient Anglo-Saxons living free in German forests, before kings and feudal lords corrupted everything. This wasn't real history. It was a dream of a perfect, lost world, a world without coercion, pure natural harmony. This, Ellis explains, unlocks Jefferson. He lived in his mind, in a world of ideals. He was a romantic who believed that stripping away corrupt old institutions would naturally restore humanity to simple, virtuous harmony. This belief was his superpower, and his greatest blind spot. When it came time to declare independence, the drafting committee included obvious choices like John Adams. But Adams deferred to the quiet Virginian. Why? Years later, Adams said it was because a Virginian should lead this thing. But the simpler truth? Adams and the others were busy managing debates and the war effort. Drafting a declaration seemed like secondary theater. They had no idea they were handing Thomas Jefferson the pen that would write him into immortality. He wrote the Declaration of Independence in days, alone in his rented room on a small portable lap desk he designed himself. And he poured his entire philosophical soul into it. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These words became the American creed. As Ellis notes, they're practically a recipe for anarchy, a wildly idealistic vision where individuals reign supreme, all external authority is suspect, and personal freedom leads not to chaos but harmony. Too good to be true. But Jefferson believed it. The other delegates didn't see a sacred text. They saw a political document needing edits. They hacked away, cutting a quarter of his original. Most notably, they removed a long passage blaming King George for the slave trade. It was bizarre. Tortured writing that condemned slavery as quote, cruel war against human nature itself, while blaming the king for inciting enslaved people to rebel. Jefferson's entire slavery struggle laid bare. He knew it was morally monstrous, poison in the American soul, but he couldn't see a way out. So he created a narrative, absolving himself and fellow planters. In his story, slavery wasn't an American sin but a British one, forced upon virtuous people by a corrupt king. Complete fiction, but for Jefferson, necessary fiction. Jefferson sat sullenly, as his words were mangled. Benjamin Franklin tried consoling him with a story about a sign painter whose sign got edited down to just a picture of a hat. But Jefferson remained inconsolable. His perfect vision had been corrupted by messy political reality, a pattern that would repeat his entire life. He'd create a beautiful, harmonious world in his mind, then feel wounded when the real world, with all its compromises and contradictions, failed to measure up. After the Revolution, personal tragedy shattered his world. In 1782, his wife Martha died after difficult childbirth. Jefferson was destroyed. For weeks, he paced his room sobbing or rode aimlessly through woods, utterly lost in grief. On her deathbed, Martha made him promise never to remarry, fearing a stepmother for their children. He kept that promise. He would never allow himself such vulnerability again. He built walls around his heart. 2 years later, seeking escape from Monticello's ghosts, he accepted a diplomatic post in Paris. He arrived in 1784, a widower in his early 40s, with young daughter Patsy. Paris was a revelation. He fell for the architecture, food, wine, sophisticated salon conversations. "I am much pleased with the people of this country," he wrote. "The roughness of the human mind are so thoroughly rubbed off with them that it seems as one might glide through a whole life among them without a jostle." But even praising the French, he was writing letters back home condemning European corruption and moral decay, another signature contradiction. He could hold completely opposite views simultaneously, serenely untroubled by inconsistency. In Paris, he deepened his friendship with John and Abigail Adams. For 9 months, they were his surrogate family. The stout, passionate, brutally honest John Adams and the tall, reserved, elusive Thomas Jefferson, they were the odd couple of the American Revolution. Adams was the realist seeing the world in all its messy complexity. Jefferson was the idealist seeing the world as it should be. They were, as Ellis puts it, the words and music of the American Revolution. Adams provided the hard, complex melody of reality, while Jefferson wrote the soaring, inspirational lyrics of the American dream. Their friendship was constant dialogue between these poles. When confronting Barbary pirates seizing American ships, Jefferson proposed a grand international coalition to punish them. A matter of honor. Adams rolled his eyes. Noble idea, he admitted, but completely impractical. America had no navy, no money. The realistic option? Pay the ransom. As always, Adams' realism grounded Jefferson's idealism. But Paris wasn't all politics. It was also the scene of Jefferson's most passionate romance. Maria Causeway, young, beautiful, unhappily married wife of an English artist. For 6 weeks in autumn 1786, Jefferson was utterly besotted. He abandoned diplomatic duties to spend every day with her, touring Paris's gardens and architectural wonders. This affair, Ellis suggests, was the ultimate expression of Jefferson's sentimental soul. The whirlwind ended when Jefferson, in youthful exuberance, tried leaping over a fountain and broke his wrist. The injury was severe, botched by French doctors, leaving him in pain for life. Before he recovered, Maria returned to London. Heartbroken, Jefferson wrote her the most self-revealing letter of his life, a 12-page masterpiece, a dialogue between his head and his heart. His heart speaks of overwhelming joy from their time together, arguing that departure's pain is worth such ecstasy. Had they philosophers ever felt the solid pleasure of one generous spasm of the heart says, they would exchange for it all the frigid speculations of their lives. His head, meanwhile, is reason's voice, caution's voice. It scolds the heart for foolishness, for exposing them to such pain. In the end, the heart gets the best lines and last word. But, as Ellis points out, the head is writing the letter. Crafting this elaborate dialogue was Jefferson's way of regaining control over emotions, turning a messy, passionate affair into beautiful, ordered literature. He preferred love, like politics, to be an ideal, a perfect mental creation, rather than a complicated physical reality. While in Paris, Jefferson watched from afar as colleagues back home wrestled with their new nation's future. When he heard about Shays's rebellion in Massachusetts, a farmer's revolt against taxes, friends like Abigail Adams were horrified. They saw impending anarchy. Jefferson's reaction was startlingly different. "I like a little rebellion now and then," he wrote. "It is like a storm in the atmosphere." In one of his most famous, chilling lines, "The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. It is its natural manure." Not just a passing remark. This revealed his political philosophy's core. While James Madison in Philadelphia painstakingly designed the intricate system of checks and balances becoming the U.S. Constitution, Jefferson dreamed of almost no government at all. His ideal society resembled Native Americans, who lived, he believed, in natural harmony without formal laws or rulers. He was, at his core, a radical, a utopian. He found the new Constitution, with its powerful central government, deeply troubling. "I am not a friend to a very energetic government," he confessed to Madison. "It is always oppressive." His distance in Paris proved a blessing. It allowed time to adjust, to be persuaded by Madison's careful arguments. Eventually, he gave reluctant support, but with one major condition: adding a Bill of Rights, explicitly limiting the new government's power, and protecting individual liberty's sacred realm. For Jefferson, government wasn't the solution, it was the problem. The best government governed least, coming closest to being no government at all. This was the man who, after serving as Washington's Secretary of State, would finally get his wish. He would retire to Monticello. In 1794, Jefferson returned to his mountain. "I have my house to build, my fields to farm," he wrote, "and to watch for the happiness of those who labor for mine." The image he cultivated was Cincinnatus, the Roman general who saved the Republic, then returned to his plow. The classic ideal of the virtuous farmer leaving politics, corrupt world for the land's simple purity. But, as with so many things in Jefferson's life, reality was far more complicated. First, he wasn't really a farmer. He was a planter, owning a vast estate and nearly 200 enslaved people. And he was massively in debt. His elegant lifestyle, endless book buying, passion for fine wines, it had all caught up. He owed a fortune to British creditors, interest compounding faster than he could pay. Farming for Jefferson wasn't philosophical pursuit, it was desperate money-making. He abandoned tobacco, calling it culture of infinite wretchedness because it destroyed soil, switching to wheat. He devised an elaborate 7-step crop rotation plan, a marvel of scientific agriculture. But harsh realities constantly thwarted his plans. Droughts, frosts, pests, bad luck. His real passion wasn't fields but projects. He was a tinkerer, inventor, builder. His mountain's most successful enterprise during these years wasn't a farm, but a small factory, a nailery. Every morning he'd walk to the nailery to weigh iron rods for a dozen young enslaved boys, aged 10 to 16. Every evening he'd return to weigh the nails they'd produced, rewarding the most efficient with new clothes. Here on his idyllic mountain, in his agrarian utopia's heart, was a small, sweat-soaked factory, a preview of the industrial world he claimed to despise. Ellis points out the incredible irony. Jefferson, the great apostle of rural life, was running a small-scale assembly line. He seemed utterly oblivious to the contradiction. His greatest project, of course, was Monticello itself. Soon after returning from France, he began massive renovation. He essentially tore down his original house and started again, determined to build an American masterpiece in the neoclassical Palladian style he'd fallen for in Europe. A financially insane decision for a man on bankruptcy's brink, but when it came to his personal environment, cost was no object. For most of his retirement, Monticello was a chaotic construction site, noisy, dusty, half-finished dream. This was where Jefferson was truly happy, not behind a plow, but behind a drafting table, designing, building, creating his own perfect world. And all of this, the farming, nail-making, building, was done by enslaved people. His return to Monticello forced him into daily, intimate relationship with the institution he claimed to hate. By the 1790s, his public position on slavery had shifted. The fiery young revolutionary who denounced slavery in the Declaration was gone. In his place was a cautious, world-weary man, now arguing for procrastination. He was caught in a trap of his own making. He believed blacks and whites couldn't live together in a free society. The deep-rooted prejudices of whites and the 10,000 recollections of injustice by blacks would, he feared, lead to race war. Emancipation, therefore, had to be coupled with expatriation, sending all freed slaves to Africa or the Caribbean. But such a plan's logistics and cost were staggering, and he knew it. "We have the wolf by the ears," he wrote in one of his most famous lines, "and we can neither hold him nor safely let him go. Justice is in one scale, and self-preservation in the other." So he did nothing. He created a paternalistic fantasy where he wasn't a master, but a benevolent father, caring for his, quote, family, black and white. He designed his plantation, making slavery's harshest realities almost invisible to him. Field hands worked on farms far from the mountaintop. The slaves he interacted with daily were house servants and skilled artisans, mostly from one family, the Hemings family. The Hemingses enjoyed privileged status at Monticello. It was an open secret that this was because they were mixed race, and several, including Sally Hemings, were children of Jefferson's own father-in-law, John Wales. They were, quite literally, his late wife's half-siblings. The light-skinned Hemings family's presence around him was a constant, visible reminder that his great fear, racial mixing, wasn't some future threat. It was happening in his own house, on his own mountain. Another contradiction he chose to live with, another difficult reality he walled off in a sealed chamber of his mind. He was a master of what Ellis calls diplomacy of the interior regions. He had incredible capacity for self-deception, an ability to hold his highest ideals and darkest realities in separate compartments, never allowing them to collide. This serene, self-contained world couldn't last. The political storms he'd fled were gathering again, soon to pull the reluctant farmer from his mountain and place him at American power's very center. In 1800, Thomas Jefferson was elected third President of the United States. He called it the Revolution of 1800, a peaceful revolution restoring true 1776 principles after a decade of Federalist corruption. Legend says he rode to his inauguration alone on horseback, hitched his horse to a post, and walked in like an ordinary citizen. Reality was slightly different. He walked, but accompanied by a small parade of militia officers and congressmen. The statement he was making wasn't about democracy as we know it, but about Republican simplicity. He was rejecting the formal, almost monarchical style of Washington and Adams. He was purging government of aristocratic pretensions. His first inaugural address is a masterpiece of political rhetoric, filled with soaring phrases about American destiny. But its most famous line was meant to heal the bitter partisan wounds of the 1790s. "We are all Republicans. We are all Federalists." Sounded like a generous, conciliatory gesture. But Ellis reveals the subtle truth. In Jefferson's handwritten draft, Republicans and Federalists weren't capitalized. He wasn't talking about the two political parties. He was saying all Americans believed in Republican government and federal union. Clever, almost invisible rhetorical maneuvering. His goal as president was implementing his vision of minimalist government. "A wise and frugal government," he said, "which shall restrain men from injuring one another, which shall leave them otherwise free to regulate their own pursuits of industry and improvement." This meant one thing above all: eliminating the national debt. For Jefferson, debt was the ultimate source of political corruption. It was the engine powering the big, powerful, intrusive government he despised. He instructed his brilliant Secretary of the Treasury, Albert Gallatin, to make debt retirement the administration's highest priority. This required deep government spending cuts. He slashed the Army and Navy, closed embassies abroad, eliminated all internal taxes. "What farmer, what mechanic, what laborer," he asked proudly, "ever sees a tax-gatherer of the United States?" He was creating a government that was, as he wished, almost invisible. He even conducted the presidency, making himself invisible. He stopped giving speeches to Congress, submitting annual messages in writing instead. No public appearances. He worked 10 hours daily at his desk, managing government through vast correspondence. It was, as Ellis calls it, a textual presidency, perfectly suited to his reclusive, writerly temperament. But this quiet, minimalist presidency was about to be rocked by an event forcing Jefferson to confront his political life's greatest contradiction. The vast territory west of the Mississippi, known as Louisiana, belonged to Spain. Jefferson was content with this. Spain was weak, declining, a placeholder until the United States was ready to expand. But in 1802, rumors flew that Spain had secretly ceded Louisiana to France, now under ambitious, unpredictable Napoleon Bonaparte. Jefferson was horrified. "There is on the globe one single spot," he wrote to his Paris ambassador, "the possessor of which is our natural and habitual enemy. It is New Orleans." French control of New Orleans meant control of the Mississippi River, the vital artery for American commerce. "From that moment," he wrote, in a stunning declaration for such a famous Francophile, "we must marry ourselves to the British fleet and nation." He dispatched James Monroe to Paris with instructions to buy New Orleans and as much Gulf Coast as possible. But Napoleon, in characteristic impulsive genius, made a counteroffer. He'd just lost an army in Haiti to slave revolt and yellow fever. His New World Empire dreams were shattered. He needed money for European wars. He offered to sell the entire Louisiana territory. All of it. For $15 million, about 3 cents an acre, the United States doubled in size overnight, a breathtaking coup, Jefferson's presidency's greatest achievement. But it presented him with a massive constitutional crisis. Jefferson was a strict constructionist. He believed the federal government had only powers explicitly granted in the Constitution. And the Constitution said nothing about acquiring foreign territory. By his own principles, the Louisiana Purchase was illegal. He drafted a constitutional amendment to authorize it, but advisors warned the process would take too long. Napoleon might change his mind. Jefferson was trapped between his most cherished principle and the opportunity of a lifetime. He chose the opportunity. "It is incumbent on those who accept great charges," he later wrote, "to risk themselves on great occasions." He urged Congress to ratify the treaty in silence, to act now and worry about constitutional niceties later. The man who'd built his career on limiting federal government power had just performed the most expansive executive power act in American history. He'd become, for a moment, the very kind of powerful, decisive leader he'd always warned against. The irony wasn't lost on his Federalist opponents, but the achievement's sheer scale overwhelmed all criticism. He'd secured an empire for liberty, a vast open space where his agrarian dream could flourish for generations. The West was Jefferson's magic elixir, the place where all America's problems could be solved, where old world corruptions could be left behind, the one thing for which he was willing to bend, even break, his own rules. But even this great triumph was shadowed by scandal. In 1802, a disgruntled journalist named James Callender, a man Jefferson had once paid to attack political enemies, published the story whispered in Virginia for years. "It is well known," Callender wrote, "that the man whom it delighteth the people to honor keeps, and for many years past has kept, as his concubine, one of his own slaves. Her name is Sally." The story of Jefferson and Sally Hemings exploded in the Federalist press. They called her the African Venus, his mahogany-colored charmer. The accusations were relentless, staining Jefferson's reputation for the rest of his life and all of history. Jefferson never responded publicly. He maintained a wall of perfect silence. And for nearly 200 years, the story remained a mystery, a battle between the Hemings family's oral tradition, who insisted they were Jefferson's descendants, and denials of his white descendants, and most mainstream historians. Then, in 1998, science intervened. A DNA study proved, beyond reasonable doubt, a genetic link between the Jefferson male line and a descendant of Sally Hemings' youngest son, Eston. The longest-running soap opera in American history had reached its final episode. The story was true. The man who wrote American liberty's sacred words had been living a secret life, fathering children with an enslaved woman who was also his late wife's half-sister. This is the deepest, most troubling part of the Jeffersonian paradox, a contradiction that cannot be explained away, only confronted. It forces us to see him not as a marble saint, but as a man of profound genius and profound flaws, a man who embodied the highest aspirations and deepest hypocrisies of his time, and our own. After a second term plagued by foreign policy troubles and the disastrous Embargo Act, Jefferson finally retired to Monticello for good in 1809. Never did a prisoner, released from his chains, he wrote, "feel such relief as I shall on shaking off the shackles of power." He was home. For his last 17 years, he was the sage of Monticello, a living legend, one of the last survivors of the heroic age. His life's final chapter was dominated by two great projects and one great friendship. The first project was a flood of correspondence. He received over 1,000 letters yearly, feeling obligated to answer everyone. "Is this life," he asked, describing himself as a mill horse who sees no end to his circle but in death? But one correspondent was different. In 1812, after years of bitter political estrangement, John Adams wrote him a short, cordial note. It began one of the most remarkable correspondences in American history. For the next 14 years, the two old revolutionaries, the North and South poles of the American Revolution, explained themselves to each other and to us. They wrote about everything: aging, religion, books, grief, aristocracy's nature. Their letters are a magnificent dialogue between the two sides of the American mind, Jefferson's soaring optimism versus Adams's skeptical realism, Jefferson's faith in human goodness versus Adams's belief in the stubborn power of human passion and ambition. They argued, reminisced, postured for posterity. They were creating their final monument, not in stone but in words. The second great project was the University of Virginia, Jefferson's final obsession, his academical village. He designed everything, from curriculum to buildings. It was the architectural embodiment of his ideals. No chapel, radical for its time. He banned theology teaching. The university would be a temple of reason. The campus itself was physical expression of his philosophy. Instead of one large, imposing building, he designed a series of pavilions for professors, flanked by student rooms, all arranged around a central lawn. A community, not a fortress, designed to foster intimacy, to break down walls between teacher and student, to create a family of scholars. In its own way, another utopian dream, a perfect world of self-government and intellectual freedom. But as he poured final energies into these projects, a shadow was falling over his optimistic vision of America's future. In 1820, the nation was convulsed by the Missouri Crisis. The question of whether slavery should expand into new Western territories threatened to tear the Union apart. Jefferson was terrified. He called it, quote, a fire bell in the night. He saw it as a Federalist plot to destroy the Republic by dividing it along geographical lines. But his proposed solution was strange and desperate. He argued for diffusion, the idea that allowing slavery to spread into the West would somehow dilute its evil and lead to its eventual demise. Magical thinking, a final, futile attempt to escape the terrible logic of the problem he'd spent his life avoiding. John Adams was horrified. Slavery was cancer, he said. To claim spreading it would cure it was madness. In his final years, Jefferson's optimism about America's future began to waver. He saw the rise of powerful federal government, bitter sectional conflicts over slavery, and feared that the useless sacrifice of his generation was about to be thrown away by the unwise and unworthy passions of their sons. I regret, he wrote, that I am now to die in the belief that my only consolation is to be that I live not to weep over it. But this wasn't his final word. His public legacy had to be one of hope. In his life's final weeks, he was invited to Washington for the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. Too frail to travel, he sent a written statement, his last testament to the world. May it be to the world the signal of arousing men to burst the chains and to assume the blessings and security of self-government. All eyes are opened, or opening to the rights of men. He died a few days later, on July 4, 1826. 50 years to the day after his most famous words were given to the world. In an almost unbelievable stroke of providence, John Adams died a few hours later, hundreds of miles away in Massachusetts. His last words were, "Thomas Jefferson survives." In the literal sense, he was wrong. But in the long, complicated story of America, he was right. The contradictions, the ideals, the dreams, the hypocrisies, they all survived. The Sphinx remained, its riddle unanswered, at the very heart of the nation Jefferson helped create. So what do we do with a man like Thomas Jefferson? What's the enduring legacy of this American Sphinx? Joseph Ellis's book doesn't give us easy answers, and that, I think, is its greatest strength. It resists the temptation to turn Jefferson into either saint or sinner. It shows him as he was, brilliant, visionary, and deeply flawed, embodying the very best and worst of the American experiment. His life reminds us that history isn't a simple story of good versus evil. It's a messy, complicated, often tragic story of imperfect people striving for noble ideals and often failing to live up to them. One of the most powerful lessons from this book is about the nature of ideals themselves. Jefferson's greatest gift to us was his soaring idealism, his belief in human freedom, in reason's power, in the possibility of a better world. That idealism is the engine of all progress. It's the star we steer by. But his life is also a cautionary tale about idealism's dangers when not grounded in reality. His tendency to create perfect worlds in his mind often made him blind to imperfections in himself and the world around him. His hatred of conflict and need for harmony led him to practice self-deception that allowed him to live with slavery's profound contradiction. He teaches us that it's not enough to have noble dreams. We also need the courage to confront difficult, messy, often painful realities standing in those dreams' way. We must be willing to do the hard work of turning ideals into action, even when uncomfortable, even when it forces us to confront our own hypocrisies. So how can we apply this to our own lives? First, we can learn to embrace complexity. In a world demanding simple answers and clear-cut heroes, Jefferson's life teaches us to be comfortable with ambiguity and contradiction. The people we admire, the nations we love, even ourselves, we're all a mix of light and shadow. Acknowledging that isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Second, we can practice what I'll call honest idealism. Let's hold on to our highest aspirations, our Jeffersonian dreams of a better world. But let's also cultivate Adams-like honesty about the challenges and imperfections we face. Let's not be afraid to confront the brute, concrete facts of the world as it is, as historian Carl Becker once said of Jefferson. True progress happens when our ideals and realities are in constant, honest conversation with each other. Finally, Jefferson's story is a profound reminder that we're all, in our own way, a work in progress. He never stopped learning, building, striving to create a more perfect world, even as he failed to perfect himself. His legacy isn't a set of easy answers. It's a set of enduring questions. And by wrestling with those questions, by confronting the riddle of the American Sphinx, we continue the work of the revolution he helped begin. We continue the messy, difficult, and beautiful work of building a more perfect union. We've journeyed through the major moments of Jefferson's life today, guided by Joseph J. Ellis's brilliant work in American Sphinx. But this is just the map. The book itself is the territory. The real magic happens when you read it yourself, when a particular story or simple phrase hits you in a way you didn't expect. This summary is designed to help you decide if this book is worth your time. If any part of this story has sparked your curiosity about the man who dreamed of liberty while living a paradox, I truly encourage you to pick up a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning history, it's about understanding the complex soul of America. The link to the book is in the description. Also, if this exploration was valuable to you, a simple click on the like button and subscribe helps us continue bringing these incredible stories from the world's best books to you. Your support allows us to keep digging into the ideas that have shaped our world. Let's keep growing together.